Jack was a man who had always lived on the edge, chasing thrills that came with the risk of losing everything. He was known in the small town for being a compulsive gambler. For years his addiction had controlled his life, and now it seemed to have taken everything he ever cared about. He had started gambling as a way to escape the routine of daily life, but now it was the only thing that kept him going, even though it was slowly tearing him apart. His wife, Mary, had always stood by him despite his bad habits. She loved him deeply and had hoped that one day he would change. She had seen the potential in Jack, the man who could have been a loving, caring partner. But with every bet, every poker game, every roll of the dice, that potential slipped further away. Jack's debts were growing. He had borrowed money from friends, from strangers, and from places that Mary didn't even know about. He had mortgaged their home, hoping to win big, but all he had gotten in return were more losses. The weight of the situation hung over their marriage, and even though they barely spoke about it anymore, the tension was palpable. Mary had tried everything to help him. She begged him to stop, pleaded with him to see the damage he was causing, but Jack never listened. He was too deep in the game. One night, after losing another round of poker at the casino, Jack found himself sitting at the bar, nursing a drink. The lights from the slot machines flashed brightly, but it all seemed distant to him. His mind was spinning with thoughts of what he had left to lose. That was when he met Tony, a well-known gambler with a reputation for making high-stakes deals. Tony was tall, confident, and had an air about him that made people take notice. "You seem like someone who's in need of a win," Tony said, sliding into the seat beside Jack. Jack glanced at him, unsure whether to engage, but something about Tony's voice pulled him in. Jack had never been one to shy away from a challenge. "I've got nothing left," Jack said, his voice laced with frustration. "No money, no future, and I'm about to lose everything I care about." Tony leaned in closer, his eyes glinting with interest. "Everything, huh? What about your wife? What's she worth to you?" Jack froze. The mention of Mary made him uncomfortable, but he didn't let on. He had always known that Mary was the one thing in his life that kept him grounded. She was the reason he had tried to get clean so many times, but now he was on the brink of losing her, and it felt like there was no way out. "Mary's everything," Jack muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Tony's smile grew wider. "So, what if I told you there was a way to win everything back? A way to settle your debts and have it all?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Tony leaned back, his fingers tapping on the rim of his glass. "I'll make you a deal, a game. You bet everything you've got, and if you win, you walk out of here with more than you could ever imagine. But if you lose, you give up something valuable, something that will make everything fair." Jack's heart began to race. He knew that Tony's games were dangerous, but something inside him whispered that this could be his last chance. The temptation was too strong. "What do you want from me?" Jack asked, his voice shaky. Tony's eyes gleamed. "I want your wife." Jack's stomach dropped. He felt a chill run down his spine, but Tony's words seemed to hang in the air like a promise he couldn't resist. Mary. He had never thought of her as something he could gamble away, but the idea of winning everything back, of finally being free of the weight of his debts, was too much to ignore. "You want me to bet my wife?" Jack's voice trembled with disbelief. Tony nodded, a smirk forming on his lips. "If you're willing to stake everything, including her, you can win back more than just money. You can have your life back, Jack, the house, the savings, everything." Jack's mind swirled with the thought. He loved Mary more than anything. But what if this was his only way out? What if this was the only chance he had to fix everything? He looked at Tony, whose confidence seemed unshakable. There was no turning back now. "What happens if I lose?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tony's expression hardened. "If you lose, you'll have nothing. No money, no home, no wife. You'll be left with nothing but regret." Jack stared at him, his heart pounding in his chest. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, but the fear of losing everything outweighed the fear of what was about to happen. He looked at his empty glass, then back at Tony, who was still waiting for an answer. "I'm in," Jack said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "I'll bet my wife. But if I win, I want everything. My debts cleared, my life back, and no more games." Tony smiled, a cold smile that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. Deal. The decision was made. Jack didn't realize it then, but he had just made a choice that would change everything. His gamble wasn't just with money. It was with his future, his relationship with Mary, and everything that he held dear. As Jack left the casino that night, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right choice. But deep down he knew he had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The next morning, Mary woke up to find Jack sitting at the kitchen table, looking more troubled than she had ever seen him. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Jack, what's going on?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I've made a deal," Jack said, his voice distant. "A way to fix everything." Mary stared at him, confused. "A deal? What kind of deal?" Jack hesitated before answering. He couldn't tell her everything, not yet, not until he knew what would happen next. "It's a gamble," Jack finally said, "and I might have bet more than I can afford to lose." Mary's heart sank. She knew Jack had been struggling, but this was something different. This wasn't just about his addiction. This was about something far worse, something that threatened to tear apart everything they had built together. She stared at him, waiting for more, but Jack didn't speak. He was already lost in his thoughts, caught in the web of his own desperation. Little did Mary know, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. The days leading up to the poker game felt like a blur for Jack. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had done was about to unravel, but at the same time, he couldn't stop the excitement that built within him. This was his chance to get everything back, to erase the past mistakes and start fresh. But as the date of the game approached, the weight of his decision began to sink in. Mary, on the other hand, had no idea what Jack had agreed to. She could tell something was off. Jack wasn't the same anymore. He had become distant, withdrawn, like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. She had asked him countless times what was going on, but Jack would only give vague responses. His usual charm, the man who could sweet-talk his way out of almost anything, was nowhere to be found. Instead, he had become a shadow of himself, plagued by an invisible burden. Mary tried to push her worries aside, but she couldn't. She knew Jack well enough to know that something was wrong. His nervous glances, his restless movements, and the way he spent more and more time locked away in his study told her everything. She had a gut feeling that whatever was happening, it wasn't good. Late one night after Jack had gone to bed, Mary decided to take matters into her own hands. She quietly entered his study, hoping to find some clue that would explain his strange behavior. The room was dimly lit, and the papers on his desk were scattered in a disorganized mess. As Mary flipped through the papers, her heart sank. She found a letter from a casino, inviting Jack to a high-stakes poker game, a game with unimaginable bets. Her hands trembled as she read the fine print, and then it hit her. The game wasn't just for money. It was for something much more precious. Jack had bet her. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, her mind racing. Was this some kind of twisted joke? She couldn't believe what she was reading. The man she loved, the man who promised her time and time again that he would never put their relationship at risk, had done the unthinkable. He had gambled her away in a game with no rules, no fairness. She felt her chest tighten as a wave of anger and betrayal washed over her. Mary sank into the chair, holding the letter in her hands, her heart pounding. She thought about the life they had built together, the good times, the struggles, the love they had shared. And now Jack had thrown it all away for a game that could cost them everything. She wasn't sure what to do next. Part of her wanted to confront Jack, demand an explanation. But deep down she knew he was already too far gone, lost in his addiction, and there was no telling what he might do next. But there was another part of her, the stronger part, that knew she couldn't let this go. She couldn't let Jack's mistakes destroy her. She had to take control, for her sake, and for the sake of their future. The next morning, Mary waited for Jack to wake up. She didn't say a word as he shuffled into the kitchen, his face weary, his eyes bloodshot. He was still in the same clothes from the night before, as if he hadn't slept at all. He had that haunted look in his eyes, the one she had seen in his face after every loss, every failed attempt to quit gambling. Jack looked at her, a nervous smile creeping onto his face. "Morning, Mary. Did you sleep well?" Mary didn't respond right away. Instead, she placed the letter on the table in front of him. Jack's face immediately dropped when he saw it. "I know what you did, Jack," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I know about the bet. I know what you've risked. You bet me. You risked everything we have. Our marriage, our future, everything." Jack's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind was racing, but he didn't know how to explain himself. How could he? There was no excuse for what he had done. Mary stood up and walked toward the window, trying to steady her emotions. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a warm light over the room, but it didn't reach her heart. She felt cold inside. "I trusted you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've stood by you through all of this, hoping that one day you'd change. But now this? How could you, Jack?" Jack's head dropped into his hands, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had no answers. He had no excuses. All he had were the consequences of his choices. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," Jack said, his voice shaking. I thought if I could win just one more time, I could fix everything. I could make things right. I never wanted to hurt you, Mary. I never wanted to lose you." Mary turned to face him, her eyes full of pain and anger. "You didn't just lose me, Jack. You gambled me away. I'm not some prize to be won. I'm your wife, your partner. And you put me in a game where the stakes are my life." Tears filled Jack's eyes, but he didn't speak. There was nothing he could say that would fix this. Nothing that could undo what he had done. His hands trembled as he looked at the letter, the realization settling in. He had lost more than just money. He had lost the one person who had always been there for him, the only person who still believed in him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know what I was thinking. I didn't realize what it would cost us. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Please don't leave me, Mary. Please don't walk away." Mary's heart ached as she looked at him. She could see the remorse in his eyes, the regret. But she also knew that words alone wouldn't fix this. She had to make a choice that would determine whether she would stay or leave. For the first time in years, Mary didn't feel like a victim. She wasn't going to let Jack's mistakes define her, and she wasn't going to let them control her future. She was stronger than that. "I don't know what to do," Mary said, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'm not going to be part of your game anymore, Jack. I need time. Time to think. Time to figure out what I want." Jack nodded, his heart breaking. He knew he had pushed her to the edge, and now he had to face the consequences. As Mary walked out of the room, Jack sat in silence, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had lost more than just money. He had lost everything that mattered. Mary had made her decision. Now Jack had to make his. The poker game was just the beginning of a much bigger game. A game that would decide whether he would ever have a chance to win back the life he had thrown away. The morning of the poker game arrived, and Jack felt a mixture of fear and excitement swirl inside him. It was as though the world had narrowed down to this one moment. His heart raced with every step he took toward the casino, his mind replaying the stakes over and over again. This wasn't just a regular game of cards. This was the game that could decide his future, his entire life. The thought of losing everything, the house, the money, but most of all Mary, kept him awake at night, haunting him in ways he couldn't explain. But now there was no turning back. The drive to the casino was silent. Jack had barely spoken to Mary that morning. She had been distant, not angry, but calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that made Jack feel even more guilty. He knew this wasn't just about the bet anymore. It was about their entire relationship. And deep down, he feared this game would be the final blow. He had taken his chance, and now he had to face the consequences. When they arrived at the casino, the lights seemed brighter than he remembered, the noise louder, and the air heavier. It felt like walking into the lion's den. Jack had always enjoyed the rush of a good game, but now the stakes were much higher. As they entered the casino, Tony was waiting for him, leaning casually against the bar, his face a mask of confidence. His smile was the same as it had been when they made the deal. Cold, unforgiving. "Jack," Tony greeted him, his voice smooth. "Glad you could make it." Jack barely nodded in response, his eyes shifting to the poker table where the game was set. It was an exclusive table, surrounded by men who wore expensive suits and had faces that spoke of power. Jack felt out of place, but he pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about fitting in. It was about winning. "I'll take a seat," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady, but the nerves in his stomach betrayed him. He could feel Mary's gaze on him, her eyes watching him with a mixture of disappointment and concern. Jack tried to ignore it, but the weight of her stare only added to the pressure he already felt. Mary had been quiet ever since they stepped into the casino. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew that Jack was in too deep. She had seen him make mistakes before, but this was different. There was something in the way he carried himself today, something dark. She was beginning to understand that Jack had crossed a line, and now there was no way to turn back. The game began. Jack sat across from Tony, and the other players were a mix of strangers who seemed far too calm for a game with such high stakes. The first few hands were easy, simple enough to keep the tension at bay, but Jack knew that it was only a matter of time before everything would be on the line. The cards were dealt, and the game became more intense with each round. Sweat gathered on Jack's forehead, his fingers twitching with nervous energy as he watched the chips pile up on the table. With every move, Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of his bet on his shoulders. If he lost, there would be nothing left. He would lose his home, his future, and most painfully, Mary. He glanced at her once more, her face unreadable. The anger that had filled her eyes earlier had softened, but there was no warmth in her gaze anymore. He could tell she was holding back from saying something, but she remained silent. Tony, on the other hand, was calm. He was the kind of man who thrived under pressure. Jack could see the smug look in his eyes as he casually glanced at the cards and made his moves. Tony wasn't worried. He knew he had the upper hand, and Jack could sense it. Every card that was played seemed to bring Jack closer to losing everything. The game reached its final hand. Jack was holding his breath, trying to read Tony's expression, trying to understand what kind of hand the other man had. Tony's face was a mask of indifference. Jack's own hand wasn't great, but it was all he had. He could either fold and lose, or he could push forward and hope for a miracle. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the bet. It was about his future, about making up for the mistakes he had made. If he didn't take the chance now, he would never forgive himself. "I raise," Jack said, his voice low but firm. The room seemed to hold its breath, the players at the table watching him closely. There was no turning back now. Tony raised his eyebrows, his lips curling into a smile. "Bold move, Jack, but do you have what it takes?" The other players at the table exchanged glances, but they remained silent, waiting for the showdown. Jack felt his palms sweat as the dealer placed the final cards on the table. He looked down at his hand, trying to calm his racing thoughts. His heart was hammering in his chest, and the room seemed to close in around him. Mary watched the game unfold in silence. She had no idea what kind of hand Jack was holding, but she could see the desperation in his eyes. She could hear the fear in his voice, the quiet tremor that betrayed the calm exterior he was trying to put on. Mary's heart ached for him. She had never seen him like this before. He was no longer the man she married, the man who had always been full of hope. Now he was a man on the edge, a man who had lost himself in the game. "Show your hand, Jack," Tony said, his voice dripping with confidence. Jack took a deep breath, his fingers trembling as he placed his cards on the table. He had a pair of eights. It wasn't great, but he was hoping it would be enough. Tony smiled, a slow, calculated smile, and laid down his cards. 4 kings. The room went silent. Jack's heart sank as he realized what had just happened. He had lost. He had lost everything. Tony's smile widened as he raked in the chips. "It's a good try, Jack, but not good enough." Jack felt like the world had fallen out from beneath him. He looked at Mary, but she wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the table, her face pale, her eyes filled with sadness and disappointment. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This was it.
He had lost it all. But then something unexpected happened.
Before Jack could say another word, Mary stood up from her seat. The entire room seemed to watch as she walked toward the table, her eyes never leaving Tony's. Jack's mind was spinning, unable to understand what was happening. "What are you doing, Mary?" Jack asked, his voice shaking, but Mary didn't answer him. She walked past him, her step steady, her gaze fixed on Tony. She reached the table and placed her hand firmly on the edge. Everyone in the room was watching her now, and there was a tense silence before she spoke. "I'm not going to let you control me, Tony," Mary said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm not just a bet. I'm not a prize to be won." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, and Jack's heart raced as he realized what she was doing. Mary wasn't just walking away from the game, she was taking control. She wasn't going to let Jack's mistake be the final chapter of their story. Tony stared at her, his smirk fading, but Mary stood her ground. Jack could hardly believe his eyes. Mary wasn't just standing up for herself, she was standing up for them. Jack may have lost this game, she said, but I haven't lost my dignity, and I won't let anyone take that from me. The room was silent for a long moment, but then in the tense stillness, Jack finally understood. Mary had made her choice. She wasn't going to let him or anyone define her. She was stronger than the game. And maybe, just maybe, she had just saved them both. The aftermath of the poker game was nothing like Jack had imagined. The once vibrant casino floor now felt suffocating, and the bright lights that usually gave him a rush now felt like harsh reminders of his loss. He had entered the game with the hope of turning his life around, but all he had achieved was the irreversible destruction of everything he had built. Jack sat at the table, his hands still trembling as he stared at the pile of chips Tony had won. He had bet everything, the house, his savings, and most painfully Mary, and now he had nothing left. The reality of his failure hit him harder than any loss he had ever experienced in the past. The cards had been dealt, but in the end, the real gamble had been his life, and he had lost. Tony, on the other hand, was still calm, unfazed by the outcome. He gathered his winnings, his smile never fading. He didn't care about the emotional toll of the game, only that he had won. He glanced at Mary, who was standing at the table, her back straight, her eyes unwavering as she watched him. For the first time, Tony seemed to notice something about her. The confidence in her stance, the strength in her eyes, it was something he hadn't expected. Jack had been too focused on winning back his life to notice the change in Mary. But now, as he looked up at her, he saw something different. She wasn't just the woman he had once promised to care for. She was stronger than that now, stronger than he had ever given her credit for. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a pang of respect for her. "Mary," Jack whispered, his voice shaky, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to lose you." Mary didn't respond immediately. She stood there for a moment, her gaze still locked on Tony, her mind racing with the consequences of everything that had just unfolded. She had watched Jack's descent into this game, had seen him gamble away their future, but she wasn't going to let it define her. She wasn't going to let him, or Tony, take away her sense of self. "I'm not angry with you, Jack," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm disappointed, yes, but I'm not angry. Because I see you now for who you really are, and that's something I needed to understand." Jack swallowed hard, feeling his heart ache. "I don't know how to fix this. I've messed everything up." Mary turned away from the table, her movements deliberate and measured. She wasn't running away from Jack, but she wasn't staying in the same place either. She had seen enough. She had stood by him for years, hoping he would change, hoping he would fight for their future. But now she realized that she had to fight for herself. The room felt quieter now, the bustling noise of the casino fading into the background as Mary's words settled over Jack. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for what she deserved. "Jack," Mary said as she walked toward the exit, her voice steady, "I've stood by you for too long hoping you'd change. But you can't change someone who doesn't want to change. And I can't keep waiting for you to fix what's broken." Jack's chest tightened. He had known this was coming. He had known deep down that this game, this bet, would be the final test. But hearing the words from Mary's mouth made it feel real. His heart sank as he realized that it wasn't just his addiction that had hurt their marriage. It was his refusal to acknowledge that Mary needed more than just promises. "I know I've failed you," Jack said softly, the regret in his voice palpable. "But I swear, Mary, I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll get help. I'll quit. No, Jack," Mary interrupted, her voice firm. "I've heard those promises before, and I've believed them every time. But you can't keep asking me to put my life on hold while you gamble yours away. I have to move forward, Jack. I have to move forward without you." Her words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He had always known that Mary was strong, but now he understood just how much strength it had taken for her to finally walk away. The realization was almost too much for him to bear. He had lost her, and there was nothing he could do to change it. Jack watched her walk toward the door, her back straight, her steps purposeful. The pain of knowing that he had lost everything, his wife, his home, his future, was overwhelming. He felt like he was suffocating in the silence that followed. There was no sound except for the distant chatter of other gamblers, but to Jack it all felt empty. His world had crumbled, and it was all his fault. As Mary reached the door, she paused for a moment, glancing back at Jack. Her eyes softened for just a second, but there was no going back. She had made her choice. She couldn't keep waiting for him to change. She couldn't keep giving him chances that he never fully embraced. "I hope you find your way, Jack," Mary said quietly, her voice filled with both sadness and resolve. "But I can't be the one who waits for you anymore." And then, without another word, she walked out of the casino, leaving Jack standing there alone. The casino, once a place of excitement and possibility, now felt like a prison. Jack didn't know what to do with himself. He had gambled his marriage, his life, and now he had lost. The emptiness inside him was unlike anything he had ever felt. For the first time, the thrill of the game seemed distant, meaningless. All the money in the world couldn't fill the hole in his heart. Tony, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, stepped up to Jack's side. His expression was unreadable as he placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You gambled more than you could afford, Jack," he said quietly. "And now you're left with nothing. But that's the price you pay." Jack didn't respond. There were no words that could make sense of what had just happened. The game was over and he had lost. But for the first time he realized that the real game had never been about money. It had been about love, about trust, and about the choices he had made. As Jack stood there watching the door through which Mary had just left, he understood. He had lost more than just a poker game. He had lost the one person who had believed in him, the one person who had stuck by his side despite all his flaws. And now the only thing he had left was the bitter taste of regret. It was too late to win her back. But maybe, just maybe, there was still time for him to win back himself. Jack sat alone at the casino table, staring at the empty seat where Mary had been just moments ago. The weight of everything he had lost pressed down on him like an unbearable burden. His hand still trembled, not from the cards he had played, but from the realization that Mary was gone. And there was nothing he could do to fix it. For years, Jack had thought he could control his life, control the game, and control the outcomes. He believed that a big win could solve everything. The debts, the broken promises, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. But now as he sat in the silence of the casino, surrounded by the remnants of his failures, he understood something that had eluded him for so long. Control was an illusion. Mary had been his anchor, the one constant in his chaotic life. She had always been there, through the highs and lows, standing by his side, offering support even when he didn't deserve it. But now he had pushed her away with his selfishness, his addiction, and his need for one more win. And in the process, he had lost her. The door to the casino opened with a soft creak, and Jack looked up, his heart sinking. He didn't need to see who it was to know that it wasn't Mary. The heavy footsteps approaching him were followed by the low, almost mocking voice of Tony. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Tony said, sitting down next to Jack, his expression unreadable. Jack didn't respond. He didn't have the energy for small talk or for more empty promises. All he could think about was the empty space next to him, where Mary used to sit, the silence that stretched between them. It was all his fault. "I told you," Tony continued, his tone almost sympathetic. "You can't gamble with people's lives. You can't just bet everything you have and expect to come out on top. You've lost more than money, Jack. You've lost the one person who mattered most." Jack closed his eyes, letting Tony's words wash over him, but they did nothing to ease the pain. Tony was right. He had gambled his marriage, his future, and now he had nothing left to show for it. "I don't know what to do anymore," Jack muttered, his voice thick with regret. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've lost her. I've lost everything," Tony sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You've got two choices, Jack. You can keep sitting here wallowing in your mistakes, or you can do something about it. But you need to decide, and you need to do it quickly. Because the longer you wait, the harder it's going to get to fix things." Jack didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to be lectured by Tony, a man who had never had to fight for anything in his life. Tony had everything handed to him, while Jack had been clawing at life, trying to get by, trying to make something of himself, and now all his efforts seemed pointless. But Tony's words echoed in Jack's mind. He had a choice. He could either give up and let the mistakes of the past define him, or he could find a way to make things right, to find a path forward. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack stood up from the table, his legs shaky but determined. "I can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "I've hurt her enough. I've hurt myself enough. It's time to make things right." Tony raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Jack's sudden decision. "You're serious?" "I'm serious," Jack replied, his voice steady. I don't care what it takes. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Jack didn't know how he would do it, but he knew he had to start somewhere. He had spent so long living in the shadow of his addiction, constantly chasing the next win, the next high, that he had lost sight of what really mattered. Mary had always been his anchor, his support, and now he had to find a way to be the man she needed him to be. The first step, Jack realized, was to go home. He didn't know what he would say to Mary, but he couldn't keep running. He had to face her, no matter how hard it would be. He owed her that much. As he walked out of the casino, the cool night air hit his face, and for the first time in a long time, he felt awake. The weight of the world wasn't lifting, but he felt a glimmer of hope, a small spark that maybe, just maybe, he could turn things around. When Jack arrived home, he was greeted by an eerie silence. The house felt empty without Mary's laughter, without the warmth she brought into every room. He stood at the door for a moment, unsure of what to do, but then he heard a sound, a quiet, steady tapping from the living room. Mary. He walked toward the sound, his heart pounding. She was sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't look up when he entered the room, and for a moment, Jack wasn't sure if she even knew he was there. Mary, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She looked up then, her eyes filled with pain. But there was something else there too, something softer, like a flicker of hope that hadn't completely burned out. I didn't come here to beg, Jack said, his voice steady. I know I've hurt you. I know I've ruined everything, but I need you to know that I'm done. I'm done with gambling. I'm done with chasing the next win. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep losing you. Mary didn't speak for a long time. She just looked at him as if she was trying to decide whether or not she could believe him. Jack could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear that he would fall back into his old habits, that he would make the same promises and break them again. I can't trust you right now, Jack, Mary said quietly. You've broken my trust too many times. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Jack's heart sank, but he didn't look away. I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm going to prove it to you, Mary. I'm going to prove that I can be the man you deserve. But I need your help. I need you to give me a chance. Mary's gaze softened, but she didn't say anything. Jack could tell she was still weighing his words, still trying to decide if she could believe him. I don't know what the future holds, Mary said after a long pause, but I'm willing to give you one last chance. Jack, but you have to understand I can't keep waiting for you to change. You have to prove it to me. Jack nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and determination. He had a long road ahead of him, and it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. I will, Mary. I promise I will. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Jack had once hoped for. But it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to earn back the trust he had broken, and to prove that he was capable of change. As he stood there looking at the woman he loved, Jack realized that redemption wasn't something you could win in a single game. It was something you had to work for day by day, choice by choice. And this time, Jack was willing to fight for it.